I was going to ask you, was there anything that you were doing specifically kind of outside of just the fundamentals and basic principles of health that really helped you turn the corner with your Hashimoto's? Um, I know, like, from what I know of Hashimoto's, it's a very debilitating autoimmune disease where your energy is really low. It's hard to move, you mentioned even just get out of bed. So I can imagine like actually feeling like you can get over the hump and heal from something like that is really challenging. Was there anything, like any one or two things that you did that really moved the needle the most?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And I think it was a combination. Like I said, I think often the simple things are overlooked because of their simplicity, but over time they can have the most profound impact. So anybody who is in that state where things are really hard, I always try to remind them there's benefits in compounding. And while one day of getting your light patterns right is probably not going to solve it overnight, 3 months of doing that, just one baby step at a time, can make a really tremendous difference. So I think the things for me were the simple ones of spending as much time outside as possible, especially because there's some really fascinating interactions. Like, we are beings made to interact with the sun. And I think a lot of disservice has been done in telling people to avoid the sun entirely for the last several decades. But there's a whole cascade of things that happen way beyond just vitamin D when we get the right light exposure. Everything from certain cells in our eyes being signaled that start the clock for our circadian rhythm, to all the different spectrum of light that we cannot see influencing our mitochondrial function, which is, I think, another key. If you need one thing to focus on what can I do that will improve my mitochondrial function, because that's the energy powerhouse of the cell. And often in a state of chronic disease, we have very depleted mitochondrial function. So of course we don't feel energetic. And of course it's hard to do things because the actual energy currencies of our bodies are not operating effectively. Light can help that. A lot of the things you guys talk about. So I moved to a very AIP type, for me for a while, very similar to carnivore before that was a term, diet, just to reduce inflammation, because I knew I was reacting to a lot of foods at that time. And so I just sort of took a like blanket approach and removed everything that could be mildly inflammatory. So I was eating a lot of the foods you guys talk about, like bone broth and regeneratively raised meats and healthy fats, which I think is also a huge one, because if you don't have enough healthy fats, and enough cholesterol, which also got a bad rap, you're not making hormones effectively. Or if your stress level's high, all of that's being used to make stress hormones, not metabolic hormones or the hormones you need for normal fertility and for optimal function. But to answer a little bit more concisely, I would say more light exposure and getting light outside. And as I got energy, I started walking outside. I didn't do any intense exercise for a year when my body was in that healing state, but I walked a lot and I spent a lot of time in the sunshine with as much skin exposed as possible to
Hmm.
let my cells start to recharge. And then I shifted from how I thought about diet, because another side effect of Hashimoto's is it makes it very difficult to gain weight. And so I had had 6 pregnancies. You tend to gain weight with pregnancy anyway. And I had all this excess weight that I wasn't able to release. And I realized because of that, I had gotten in a mindset of a really negative relationship with food, and also how I thought about food in my body. So I had kind of gotten into this deprivation, punishment, food is bad mentality. And as I started researching it, I realized, we hear a lot about Americans and, of course, the obesity epidemic, and we're certainly not underfed. We're getting plenty of calories in most cases, but our diet is largely devoid of an actual amount of micronutrients. And I know you guys talk about this, the protein we need for our cells to actually exist and function. And
Yes.
when we're in that state, the body in its wisdom craves more food because it's desperately trying to reach those basic micronutrient levels that it needs and the basic protein levels that it needs to function properly. So when I shifted, instead of trying to fit in any kind of macros or calories, but focused on the nutrient density of my food, that changed so much as far as my energy levels as well. And so I really just started evaluating, of the food I'm going to eat today, how can I get the maximum amount of nutrients into my body? Sort of like calories be damned. How do I get the maximum amount of nutrients into my body? And those were the first two baby steps that really started shifting things. I think beyond there, it does get into a lot more of the personalization. If there's specific nutrients your body needs that might not be blanket. So for instance, for me, I was intolerant to eggs for a long time when I was in the heat of the Hashimoto's. And so I hadn't eaten eggs in years, and I was super choline deficient. So figuring that out, getting enough choline from supplements turned my brain on in a way I hadn't felt in years. That was a very specific case, though. That doesn't mean everybody who takes choline is going to feel amazing the next day, but there might be pieces like that that you have to figure out individually. But I would say start with light, sleep, and nutrient density. And then from there, build in the gentle, right kind of movements you need, any specific nutrient support you need. If there's therapies you need that can help speed that process of getting the bad stuff out or getting good stuff into your body, do that then. But get the foundational first, because that's going to make everything else you do work so much better.
Mm.